Hi everyone, I'm delighted to welcome you to TrueFit's webinar focused on unwrapping the returns conundrum. This is a three-part series where we aim to shed light on the many areas which drive up returns. Today's episode is focused on going to the source of the sizing issues in fashion. The second part of this series will be digging into whether brands are too focused on making products look desirable and aspirational, relating and leading to customers being more disappointed when they receive the item. And then part three will be looking at the logistics challenge around the growth of digital revenues. But back to today, it's pointless talking about returns without looking at the source of issues in fashion. I'm delighted to introduce you to our esteemed panel. First up, we have Astrid, who is the Principal Customer Success Manager for the EU. Astrid works with many of our European retail partners such as Bash, Claudie Perlot, Printemps Group in France, and also UK retailers like Boden. She partners with their teams to support objectives through our product and looking at data and analysing customer insights to support strategy. We also have Heather, Global Director of Markets. Today, Heather leads TrueFit's marketing, but her prior focus at TrueFit was in working with the brands and putting their shopper data to work to understand preferences in their highest value shoppers and taking advantage of TrueFit's network of data to improve and understand size and consistency. She's partnered with our customers' merchandising and technical design teams to establish fit and sizing as a sign of trust and a point of differentiation for brands as they carve out their loyalty strategies. And then finally, Dr. Simeon Gill, who is the Senior Lecturer for Fashion Technology at the University of Manchester. I'm really pleased that Simeon has been able to join us today, and I'll give you a bit more insight into his background. But I think his view and lens in terms of understanding and seeing the sizing issues is going to be a really sort of interesting point to the conversation. Also, my name's Sarah Curran. I'll be chairing the conversation from a place of having lived and breathed the issues in terms of returns in retail. So our focus for this episode is going to really look at the source of size-related issues in the challenge of digging into what really drives up returns. We know that as an industry, we've had an issue with size and fit for many years, and the acceleration of digital growth over the last 18 months has by default led to an increase in the operational changes and challenges of returns. As a leader in size and fit, we work with some of the world's best known brands and retailers as a technology partner. However, I believe there are many reasons for the increase in returns, and many of which are not related to sizing issues, and we'll dig into these over the course of the series. But today it's back to issues at the point of design. So Dr. Simeon Gill, if I can just call you Simeon, if that's okay, it would be great if you could just give us some sort of context and background in terms of what you've seen in the market.
Okay, so I mean, you talked about some of the changes that have happened over time, and definitely with the increase in digital. One of the interesting things that's happened with digital has been the transition from brands simply informing their customer of a size by nomenclature, so 8, 10, 12, 14, to transition to a system now where they're looking to express the size of the garment by bust, waist, and hip, which is how it operates in product development practices. And then some of the evolution of things like TrueFit's interface, where the views of the consumer and their perception of fit start to come to the fore. So there's been some really interesting developments as well in how knowledge has been structured around that. And you can see it in the interface development. So from initially going from, pick the size, to, we need to consider more widely your perception of fit and fit expectations in the broader retail environment to help define where you might purchase from. And then probably just the last thing on that is to see the transition that's there of saying, you know, initially it was like, this is your size. And now we're saying it's likely this size will fit you, because there's that kind of recognition of subjective engagement with product and some of the kind of learned elements around fit.
Yeah, and you've also been using sort of body scanning technology as well to help kind of rationalize those sizing sort of charts or specifications rather. Is that something that you see is being picked up at the retailers and brands design sort of teams, you know, at that first point? Or is it still quite a manual?
Sorry, I don't see enough of it. It's almost like they exist in separate spheres. There's some limited examples of companies starting to engage with technology. I think part of the problem that happens, and it is to some degree slightly problematic, there's an assumption that bodies are proportionally very similar. And I think, you know, the easiest way to note that isn't the case is to take siblings who may share, you know, the same environment, the same diet, you know, the same sort of things that you'd think would make them similar, and actually they're divergently quite different. And populations are very different. That's a key thing about, you know, the way the populations are. They don't grow more similar, they grow more divergent. Yeah. And in the context of sizing, there's an anticipation, and it comes from historic tailoring methods, early dressmaking techniques of where people talk about proportions. I was just somewhere the other week where they were saying, oh, don't try a pair of jeans on it. If a pair of jeans, if you put them around your neck and they fit around your neck, they'll fit your waist. And then somebody said, oh, you know, is that the same as the leg being as long as your arm? And you go, these are novel ideas. But actually, people aren't really like that. Yeah. One thing with scanning that's been very notable for us, especially even with a small data set, is how divergent the population is and how difficult it often is to start to filter them against existing size offerings. And in the times we've done that, when we've looked at bust, waist and hip for a female population and size offering of bust, waist and hip for retailers in the UK, when you start to mesh the two together against acceptable fit tolerances of, say, 3 centimeters difference, what you find is that roughly half of the population aren't served against their bust, waist and hip in the retail offering. One of their measurements or more fall outside of the offerings of the retailers because their shape is different from retailer shape offerings.
Yeah. It's such a complex subject, isn't it? I think it's really interesting as well, because Heather, you've been within the TrueFit family now for a while. So it'd be really interesting for you to also give some context with regards to TrueFit, but also what you know, what we have seen change, you know, almost pre-COVID and what we're seeing now.
Absolutely. So I'll just give a quick overview of TrueFit. TrueFit is really a data-driven consumer experience platform that really builds and establishes trust and loyalty with shoppers through helping them be connected with products that they will love. And what we've done over the last 10 years is connect the industry's disparate data set to really provide powerful recommendations in terms of size and fit that connect shoppers with, as Simeon just said, their own fit expectations. And so what we've done is we've connected data from 17,000 brands across 80 million annual active members that tell us a little bit about themselves, from their demographics to their preferences and their favorite brands. And we really learn about how brands and shoppers are interconnected through observing transactions across over 150 global retail partners. And so what we've seen over the last 10 years is that size and fit is really a trust exercise. It's a way to establish trust with the consumer and an understanding that the consumer feels served by the brand. And so I'd love to dive in deeper with Simeon to really understand what are some of the things we can do in terms of size and fit to better communicate to shoppers, but also to produce products that meet their expectations.
Um, and I guess again, Simeon, back to you. I want to kick off. Obviously, you've given us the overview with regards to where you have seen the challenge, but in terms of then going back to specifically the issue around sizing specifications, why do we have such an inconsistency of size across fashion apparel and brands globally? I mean, I know that we have always had an issue with consistent sizing in the UK, as an example, on the high street. But then with the acceleration of digital, this then becomes, this is an explosion, because now we're not only looking at brands and sizes related to the UK, but it's now just everywhere. What is there, can you sort of, I guess, drill down to help us understand why we still haven't resolved this issue as an industry?
Yeah, part of it some of it is practice in terms of how things are undertaken at the moment. Some of it is the theory, the kind of knowledge that people can draw upon to support that practice as well. And, most notably is probably one of the studies from Schofield and Laidet from 2005, where they looked at grading practices, which underpin essentially ready-to-wear development, and say, that the process of grading, of creating ready-to-wear in proportionate size or even disproportionate size, predates sizing surveys. So, the first sizing survey was in the 1940s, and we built sizing surveys from then. But the practice of creating proportionally similar garments from a base existed a long time before that. And if you look at the history of how product development practices have evolved, it was all about, a small tailor or dressmaker in a town having a series of proportionally similar blocks that they can pick from their customers. So they didn't have to draft for each customer each time. And there was an expectation of some degree of amendment to the product, some fitting or some development. And really, since about 2000 is when you've seen the move away from there being any anticipation of people modifying the garments. So, in the mid 90s, it was usual for you to buy a pair of jeans and then have them taken up. The problem being you probably wanted to wash them first before you got them taken up. But that aside, that's the tail end of the expectation that the consumer would modify the garment they bought to get the fit that they want.
Yeah.
And we're left now in a situation where the anticipation is ready-to-wear covers everybody. But when we look at the type of data we've gathered in the studies we've done, what we see is there is very little consistency within the retail offering in terms of the brands are dissimilar in their bust, waist and hip measurements. But when you look at that, what you see is, whilst the measurements are dissimilar, the anticipated expectations of difference between the measurements is quite similar itself. So that suggests that there's little consistency in size offering, but there's a lot more consistency in shape offering of sizing, and a lot less consistency of shape in a population as you observe them.
And also then I guess you have the inconsistency from a sizing specification dependent on where it's manufactured, which, can lead to this issue where you have certain parts of your product coming from one manufacturer in Portugal, the other one coming from maybe a manufacturer in India, and they have different gauges dependent on, where they come from, and it just creates more confusion when you really drill down.
Sometimes different cultural norms around what fit means in terms of proximity to body. So ease, difference between body and product, that might differ. Difference in practices from how they derive patterns. So when we look at research that we've undertaken within Manchester, if you draft a pattern using the same specification but a different pattern drafting method to originate the block, you could end up with a very different block, because the draft has built into it inherent expectations, both ease but also proportion and shape. So if you look at some of the pattern drafting methods, they'll always create a pitch of the shoulder slope at 22 degrees. Now, not everyone's at 22 degrees, they may differ, but it gives an illustration, that kind of heavy standardization with some methods. But if you were to draft a pattern by one pattern making method in one part of the world and use a different pattern making method in another part of the world, even if you use the same measurements to drive them, you'd have a different block. And so that becomes problematic. Yeah. I suppose one of the things that becomes more difficult, and we've run some interesting stuff for industry where we've asked people to come in and bring size charts, but companies never part with size charts. They treat size charts as if they're incredibly valuable. And actually, and then they have specification documents, and they'll often bring them instead. So a flat spec where you measure a product to make sure it's within manufacturing tolerances. And actually what they never have is the difference between the two, i.e. ease. That's actually really valuable data. What is the difference between body and product for different product categories? So you understand your consumers' fit expectations, and then you could start to make in a more informed way. So a lot of what happens in product development is kind of guesswork or supposition, and it could be very heavily controlled.
I guess going to you, Astrid, you know, what have we seen in e-com since the pandemic? What are the challenges that retailers are facing into?
Yeah, I mean, it would be an understatement to say that the online shopping landscape has evolved since the pandemic. We saw 10 years of digital acceleration from shoppers in the space of 3 months. So when COVID hit and retail stores were shut for March, the omni-channel retailers and brands with strong high street revenue contributions that were not advanced enough in their digital transformation found themselves in a really difficult position and started to play catch up. Customers who used to be strong in-store shoppers started to really adjust to the convenience of online shopping. And I'm thinking of the 40 plus customer demographic in particular. And when we look at the shopper behaviors that have prompted those changes, we see from this McKinsey study, the surge in online shopping with 75% of US customers reporting that they tried a new shopping method in response to store closing, economic pressures, and changing priorities. And this with a strong intent to continue those behaviors. In addition, and this is a shock to loyalty, we also see that 73% intend to continue a new shopping method or a different brand. And this makes the first experience your customers have when shopping on your website as crucial as ever. So not only we've been dealing with the pandemic and huge shifts in consumer behavior, but retailers are also faced with the challenges linked to Brexit in the UK, especially with the supply chain, the decline of the high street, and an ever more demanding customer whose expectation in terms of customer experience is very high, all this in an extremely competitive environment.
And I guess as retailers, for us, you know, we motivate customers to buy, but do you think from what we're seeing, we're motivating them to keep the items?
That's a very good question. And actually, it's essential to understand the current landscape of returns. So as we said, since the pandemic, we've seen a major shift in purchasing behavior, but also in returning behavior. So free returns are now the norm across the industry. Return windows are longer. With free home collecting services, people don't even have to leave their house anymore to send back an item. We've also seen a rapid increase of new payment facilities like buy now, pay later, or pay only for the items that you keep. And simply also the fact that fitting rooms have been closed for a long time. So we have made returning items increasingly easier and more convenient for customers. And all these new practices have fundamentally changed the way customers interact with retailers and make purchasing decisions. It has allowed customers to approach online shopping more as a discovery of styles and fits rather than an end of the shopping journey. So where we used to walk into stores to look at different brands and fabrics and colors and cuts and trends and look for inspiration and then try different styles on, often with the shop assistant's help, we're now going through the discovery journey digitally. And a shopper's first physical experience with the item is now at home. So the fabric, the stretch, the size, of course, but also how it associates to their preference. So how they want to wear the item, or the size, the fitted. In the event that a shopper is discovering a brand for the first time, there is also that emotional connection that is made with the brand. And again, feeling the clothes, the fit, and the quality of the fabrics for the first time. So the shift from physical to digital shopping removes the tangibility of buying. So to compensate for this, shoppers often order and return more when buying online. We see shoppers often buy many items with no intent to keep them all. We call this behavior style sampling. So to give an example, maybe they have an upcoming wedding and they buy 5 to 6 dresses, or maybe they want the perfect pair of straight leg jeans and they sample 3 different brands and washes. And also fashion products are more linked to the fancy desires of the consumers that demand a higher satisfaction than for those products that are just need-based. So there are many reasons we as shoppers return. The main reasons seen across the industry for returning an item online, or the style or shape didn't suit me, it didn't look like it did online, the quality did not meet my expectations, the features did not meet my expectations, the size was too big or was too small, the fit was poor, was just an unexpected fit, and also the buyer's remorse. That's when shoppers buy more than what they can or what they want to keep. So in order to really solve the problem, you have to go to the source of the issue and look at what those reasons tell you. If the shape or the style didn't suit, are you targeting the right customer? If the item didn't look like it did online, it's a great opportunity to look into your photography and post-production. If the quality didn't meet the customer's expectation, or the fit was poor or unexpected, maybe look at your manufacturing and design. And if the sizing isn't right, how do you manage your customer's size expectations? And how do you tackle fit consistency across your brand?
And Simeon, do you find that you have any direct engagement with the brands and the high street brands, particularly around size expectations and consistency? You know, as I said, we know that as an industry in the UK, we've had, you know, every 10 years we have this sort of high street size campaign, because it does have, there are the impacts not only to the retailers and the brands from a fiscal perspective, but to the customer. Let's not forget the impact of that it can have emotionally on a woman's self-esteem and self-confidence. Have you sort of seen any successful sort of collaborations where a project has maybe sort of helped really sort of improve a sizing recommendation or ratio rather?
Probably not that I can think of. The industry tends to, you know, in terms of industry collaborations, because they tend to work very separately, sometimes because of the way in which data is gathered and presented. They tend to work very separately often from some of the academic studies that happen. But I mean, I can definitely reinforce the way in which a product can make somebody feel about their body. It's not unusual when we scan people for them to refer to their body in a variety of ways. So they might say, oh, I have short legs or long arms. And it's not unusual just in normal discussion around people's experiences of clothing to comment in that way. But the only way they learn those ideas about their body often are through clothing and clothing interaction. So somebody learns they have short legs because all the trousers are too long for them. Or they learn they have this other element of their body because of how they experience clothing. There's a really interesting quote in a book by Professor Sarah Grogan, who's a health psychologist that I've worked with. When I read through her book, there's a thing about, people weighing themselves to feel happy. And then there's just a bit in there where a woman says, well, I keep this pair of jeans in my wardrobe. And if they fit me, I'm happy with my body. And that's a really stark illustration of how clothing is used as a sort of positive reinforcement tool.
Yeah.
But equally, we don't see the kind of negative reinforcement that can be there. So, and it can be very difficult. So, for instance, the fit inconsistency is important. When I've had these discussions with people, they'll say, oh, I like X retailer because they're consistent. Whatever I buy from them, it fits me. If it says this size, it will be this size. And some of that is maybe about the control they have. So some retailers, if they source from multiple places, it's unlikely they're going to have fit consistency because the same fit model, the same size spec may not be used.
Exactly.
Yet the same, the same size code might be used.
And I guess part of, and Astrid, I'll come back to you. I mean, we know that the cost from an environmental perspective on the increase in returns, that's spoken about a lot. But there is also the invisible cost in terms of stock being repurposed for, to go back into the cycle, as it were. What have you sort of seen from that angle?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you said, the cost from a sustainable angle are very much talked about. But retailers have definitely felt the pain from an operational cost perspective as well. Every time an item is returned and that item has to be reprocessed back into stock, potentially steamed and potentially remarketed, etc., you're eating into your margin.
Yeah.
So it's a headache. It's a complete headache. But sizing issues need to be dealt with, and we need, frankly, to stop putting the problem back at the customer's feet to deal with, because it only comes back to hurt the business later. And also, let's not forget that this leaves the customer with a negative experience. One incredible stat that we found is that 94% of customers who shopped at a new brand online did not return. And what we find at TrueFit is that we tend to convert normal shoppers to Uber shoppers. And that means that those shoppers adopt TrueFit, they buy more and they come back more frequently, and they also become loyal and engaged shoppers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Heather, how can we evaluate returns and make meaning out of them as the shifting consumer behavior continues? How can retailers sort of really leverage returns and data around it and learn and grow from it whilst everything is moving at such a fast pace?
Astrid just covered the real pain of returns, and it's not a new problem in the industry. And really building context around returns and returns behavior is key to not just mitigating returns or getting them under control, but really driving customer lifetime value. So data and analytics are something we're going to cover in the next few slides around how to really help brands create new models and processes for understanding how fit plays into returns or how styling plays into returns. And there's lots of different ways to look at this data to help kind of build on customer lifetime value and loyalty. Returns are really a symptom of something much greater, an opportunity. They're really a way to understand, how to connect the right product to the right shopper and how to meet their expectations as they evaluate your product, both online and then when it shows up at the door. So we can kind of go into some of the ways we can really unpack the returns problem. So you can see here, we talked through some of this, right? Manufacturing, tracking, and improving size consistency and inconsistency. Bringing ways to evaluate fit expectations. So maybe PDP copy guidance that says, size down for a more fitted fit with that garment. Photography, understanding, it might look really nice to have a lay flat image of a a blazer or a top, it might be a clean way to show the product. But if it's not shown on a body or a body that looks similar to you, is it too difficult to evaluate? And then there's other post-production practices like retouching images and potentially removing the true color of the actual garment. Ratings and reviews are a great way to listen to customer feedback, not just about fit, but about features in the product. Maybe the hood is too small, or maybe the zipper looks cheap to the shopper when it arrives. So there's lots of different ways to unpack this. We're going to focus in this particular part of the series on fit with Simeon's expertise, but we will review some of the other pieces that factor into returns in later episodes.
You know, I think it's really interesting because I recall when I was on the other side of the desk, as I refer to it, we used to do everything to make the item look impactful and desirable and lustworthy. And so there would be a lot of post-production from, you know, in terms of imagery tweaking with Photoshop, without thinking that actually we were just causing ourselves a headache further down the line, because we were almost so fixated on returns just being about size, but actually a key big part of that is also about disappointment that the item didn't sort of look as it did in the imagery.
So in terms of going back to the fit part of the subject, fit is really complex, and Simeon actually said it perfectly earlier. It's so personal, right? So when you put on your favorite pair of jeans, that feeling of confidence, that feeling of really connecting with a brand. And then conversely, when you put on a pair of jeans that isn't quite right for you, how the emotional feeling behind that of not feeling understood by the brand, or not feeling understood in terms of how that fits your body shape. And I think we all have a specific challenge we try to overcome in terms of trying to connect ourselves with the right fitting product. Like, for example, having a short inseam or having maybe a long torso, how that plays into the challenges of finding the right product or the brand that understands your body most. And I think this is a lot more critical when we shop online than it ever was when we shopped in stores. Because when we shop online, there's a whole process that we have to do to pack up that product and ship it back, and then go back to the drawing board and buy more products online to try to find the right fit. When we were in a store, we often had an associate that could help us pull products for us that would fit our body shape. So I think it becomes even more emotional than it already was when we're shopping online.
Totally. And I think also when we were just shopping purely in store, maybe from the true size and fit issue perspective, maybe the finance team or the merchandisers didn't necessarily see it so visibly because the stock was in one location. Whereas if you've got stock that's going out to a customer, being returned, a replacement being, then it's so, once you see its sort of movements and its miles taken, it becomes a sort of a different problem, and it's much more visible.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to sort of unpack the different elements of fit, because it's so complicated for shoppers. It's also really complicated for the manufacturers and designers. So we actually share a lot of data around fit consistency with our retail partners today. Astrid is well aware of how this data really helps bring context to returns with her retailers. One of the things that you can really assess from benchmarking your fit against a set of brands in the same category is that you can start to understand when a fit block is really driving inconsistency in fit, or if it's fabrication, or if it's how the shopper wears your product versus how it's intended to be worn. So if we look at this particular example, this basic cotton blend tee is being manufactured off of the same fit block, but each of these t-shirts are running large. So shoppers are really sizing down in this product. We're observing this in our data from the transactions and consumer data that we connect. And we're able to actually tell the retailer that the fit block could be the source of the return. When we look at the next example, because there's so many other elements of fit, and fit is really intertwined with style, what you can see really is that fabrication can often drive fit inconsistencies. So if we look at this watercolor mini cami dress, it is being designed and produced from the same fit block. However, one of them is knit and one of them is woven. And so when we look at the knit mini cami dress, it's actually running large. Shoppers are sizing down. So this is a case where the fabrication and the stretch of the garment are actually driving the shopper to buy in a different size from what they might expect. And so a great way to connect with shoppers and help them more easily evaluate this is by putting some notes in the PDP that say, if you would like a more fitted cami dress, size down in the knit cami dress. And so we see this often with our retailers, and we share often ways that they can connect with shoppers so that they have that expected fit experience when the product arrives at their door.
And I know that next year there's some exciting sort of new product launches happening. So, that should also help with ease on the product description page.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that TrueFit does really well is serve fit guidance to 100% of our shopper base. So whether you want to engage and tell us a little bit about yourself and your preferences, you can get a personalized fit recommendation. Or if you just want to learn how other shoppers are buying the product, you can read some of that advice just on the product detail page with our customers. And the last piece, which we observe so much in our data set today, is actually, if we go back one more slide, is that sometimes shoppers are not really wearing the product as it was intended to be worn. So if we look at this shift dress to the right, this is more of a trapeze shape. This dress is meant to look oversized. It's meant to not really be close to the body. And we see shoppers are sizing down significantly in this product. And so, it's not necessarily here where it's about the fit being inconsistent. It's just that the shoppers buying it are wearing it differently from the intended design and fit. So sometimes it can be great to actually show different ways to wear this type of product so that shoppers can really bring to life like how they would like to wear it and if they should size up or down in the product. So showing it on multiple bodies or showing it with the shopper with the model dimensions and her wearing different sizes can be really helpful in evaluating, what fit is best for me or how do I want to wear this? We see this also with sizing up on like an oversized blazer, for example, to get that intended and desired look. So it can really be about styling to connect with shoppers on this kind of a use case.
And I've seen definitely, and I think it was on Skims, the lingerie brand, where it can show the item worn on a size more similar to you. And I think that's fantastic from a body positivity perspective, because we're so used to seeing particularly lingerie or swimwear it shown on a woman with an incredible body, but it looks nothing like the vast majority and certainly nothing like mine. So you can see the item on a sort of a more similar sized frame.
Yeah.
And I think sort of segueing into styling and providing sort of relevant information and education to shoppers and post-production and studio photography play such an important role in satisfying a customer's sort of needs, especially in their first visit or purchase. Can you share a few examples of this that you've seen working with retailers?
Yeah. So we will go into this in great depth in a future episode, so I will touch on it. So in terms of styling, choice of model, or choice of photography, it can really not be helpful in the shopper evaluating what would be best for them. So if we look at this knit jacket to the right, we see it's on the model, and we can really understand how it would fit ourselves, right? We can understand if, would I like that fit on my own body? If we look at the knit shirt on the left in a lay flat, we know very little about where that will hit on our hip. We know very little of if it's boxy or if it's going to be fitted. And, we see the knit shirt styled under the knit jacket in the right, but we really have no idea or can't connect how this knit shirt might fit our body in the way that that it was photographed. And so if you see in our fit data below, the same dashboard I just shared earlier, you can see that the knit shirt is being perceived as running large by shoppers buying it. So it might be boxier than they ever expected. And so when we can actually show multiple models with multiple heights wearing the product, we can really connect that shopper or that product with the right shopper. And then going into more of photoshopping and retouching, these are the same product. Also the styling of it, one's zipped and one's unzipped. One is potentially being pinned or like modified. So we really don't understand what we're going to get when we buy this product. And so what we're seeing often, especially with our retailer base, is that it's important to bring things like user-generated content into the product detail page for evaluation. It's important to have real people wearing the product of many different shapes and sizes and seeing it sort of in action. It's also a great trend right now to actually have ambassadors or nano influencers doing video reviews, so you can actually see the product in motion on real people that aren't models. And so I think when we can sort of remove the photoshopping and the idealistic state of the product, we can actually connect shoppers with products that they will love and they will keep and that will make them feel really good about themselves. And then reviews are actually a great source of bringing more context and emotion from customers to the retailer. So one of the things that we work on often with retailers is they'll tell us, here are 5 styles that are my highest returns. Can you help us understand what might be going on? And we can look at fit data to see if that really is the source. And you can see in this example that for this jacket, it's running true to size, but it has a really high return rate. And so when we look at ratings and reviews, we can actually bring more context around what is it that could be driving this. And if we see multiple references to maybe a high collar or a noisy zipper or whatever feature that the shopper didn't desire, we can really understand more about what is it within the product that doesn't meet the shopper's expectations if the fit is consistent. And so reviews are just a great way to, again, connect and listen, but also provide more anecdotal context to something like our data set, which provides a deep understanding of how the fit is trending against other brands.
And what are some of the behaviors that can signal a customer is worth investing in and marketing to? Do you see some behaviors that signal the shopper needs assistance and confidence?
Yeah, so there's a lot of traffic coming to a lot of retail sites, and the cost of acquisition is high. But it's really about getting that customer to revisit with your brand and have a great first experience. And so Astrid mentioned this example earlier about, I'm going to a wedding and it happens to be Saturday, so I don't have much time to buy a dress and have it not fit me or not be the style that I want. So I'm going to sample a bunch of different styles and see what the best style is for me. So on the right, we see a shopper putting 3 different dresses in their cart. This is actually while the shopper may return 1, 2, or all of these, it is a signal of a savvy or super shopper. So it is a great way to understand, how can I build a connection and more relevance with this shopper? Because she may buy a lot and return a lot, but she also probably buys in more frequency and will keep maybe more than one item. On the left, with size sampling, this is a high intent to return behavior. So this is a behavior that you might want to isolate and understand more, especially if it's happening with the same garment. So this is when the shopper puts 2 dresses in her cart with the full intent to return one of the sizes. And so one of the things that we do work on with our retail partners is trying to intercept, unpack, and understand this behavior. We have partnered with some of our retailers to actually intercept that behavior and provide relevance to the shopper of, hey, answer a few questions for us and you'll actually be able to figure out which of these dress sizes is your best fitting. And that really plays well into the convenience piece of what shoppers really desire. Shoppers don't want to return an item. So if they're given that prompt, it is a value add for them to go in, create a true fit profile and understand the fit in relation to their own preferences, but also in relation to what we understand about that particular garment's fit.
So we're coming up to, the final question. And Simeon, I'd love to, to get your view. As we've kind of been touching on with regards to the impact, some of the impacts that size-related issues can have, it can really lead the shopper with a negative association to your brand. Plus, how they feel about themselves, importantly. This disrupts that emotional connection between the customer and your brand, and also the invisible cost, which is the potential impact to self-esteem for that sort of customer, particularly at a younger age. In terms of this, what have you seen over the years? What's the research telling you in terms of the impact emotionally to the customer and specifically issues with size?
I suppose, most people that we engage with suggest that they find size varies, right? That they find it inconsistent. They often reflect positively if they find a brand that fits them in the way they want. And sometimes, even with regard to some of the new ways in which size is engaged with, and I talked about how it's changed and we moved to a system where people are thinking about bust, waist and hip. And we've expanded past that because most of the interfaces now will ask people to characterize their body by different, elements of, do you have a small waist or a large waist, or do you have large hips, small hips? Does your tummy stick out a lot, a little? People aren't necessarily used to considering themselves in this way. And it's interesting because we see people running into problems with how they interface themselves with the product. And it would be nice to see some of that developing a little bit more, some way by which the mediation of the product to the consumer meets the consumer. So they can say, well, actually, I have this, or I describe my body in this way against the expectations. That would help. In a traditional bricks and mortar store, you wouldn't know how many times the garment that you purchased had been tried on before. It almost doesn't matter. Just that you can try it on and you get it. And almost with our shift to online, now that's something we can count. It is a concern. But, 50 people or 2 could have tried on any product in a store, bricks and mortar store, and no one would know. And they get to have an understanding of how that product might fit them. They might shop with other people as well. It's a bit harder to do online. And you're right to say we move the trying on space, into the home then.
And Heather, I'd love for you to have that final word with regards to customer lifetime value.
Yeah. The state has really changed in terms of shopping. We've really covered that off here in terms of discovering product is very digital now, and then discovering it the second time at that really critical moment is in your home. And so it really is about driving trust and customer lifetime value through making evaluation of a product easy, from what are the fit model measurements that this product was designed from? Are there multiple fit models that, you know, one will relate to my body versus the other? And so fit is a critical piece of this. Fit is something that does drive loyalty because it's so emotional. And so when we can remove fit hesitancy with the shopper, we can really start to make evaluation meet the expected desire when that shopper receives the garment or shoe in their home. And so it's really about, you know, providing a great experience for that new shopper, but also building on that experience as you learn about them and they return to your site and buy more. So yeah, I think it's a really important piece to understand shoppers' preferences over time. And then you start to learn more about their expectations, and you can serve them more relevance as they return to the brand.
I mean, I could carry on talking about this subject for hours. That's why I love what I do. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Simeon for joining us in this topical subject, and also, of course, to Heather and Astrid for their valuable insight. So, as I said at the beginning, this season we will be releasing over the coming weeks 3 episodes specifically around unwrapping the returns conundrum. Episode 2, as I mentioned at the start of the session, we'll be looking at other areas that brands and retailers might be creating an increase in returns via marketing or studio and campaign imagery. And part 3 will be looking at the logistics challenges and also the cost of digital acceleration and returns. So thank you very much, my amazing panelists. Thank you again, Dr. Simeon Gill, for your valuable contribution and insights. And all that's left to say is have a great afternoon.